Night descended, and the cemetery on the edge of town was swallowed by an unsettling silence. Rows of headstones stood in rigid formation, cold and pale beneath the silver wash of the moon. The wind hissed through brittle branches, carrying with it the dry rustle of fallen leaves across the damp earth. It was the kind of place people only entered in daylight to leave flowers before hurrying back out. Yet for one man, it was home, an old man, gaunt and frail, his hair a wiry white tangle, his shoulders bent under the weight of time. He appeared at dusk, just as the last light of the sun bled away. Quietly, he would tug his tattered coat tighter around his thin frame, shuffle to a familiar corner, and lean against a gravestone. There he would drift into sleep, with no bed, no blanket, just the earth's chill and the cover of darkness. To the townsfolk, the sight was eerie and unsettling. A homeless relic, nameless to most, who chose to sleep among the dead rather than under any roof. Rumors sprouted like weeds. Some whispered he had committed crimes long ago, cast out by his family. Others claimed he was mad, broken by war and memories no one could bear. Children were forbidden to come near. Now and then, young men with more bravado than sense hurled stones or jeered as they passed. But the old man never retaliated. He sat still, eyes distant, as though gazing far beyond the grave markers. Words of ridicule slid off him like rain off stone. Always in his grasp was a small, threadbare cloth bag, hugged close to his chest when he slept. No one knew what it contained, but the way he guarded it told all who saw it was the only treasure he had left. To most, he was little more than a shadow in the cemetery, a grim reminder that death lingered nearby. But sometimes, when the moon cast its glow, his weathered face revealed more than sorrow. There was a strange trace of pride, as though he wasn't merely resting among tombs, but standing watch over them. The townspeople avoided him, but anyone observant enough could sense an unanswered riddle in the air. Why would an old man choose a graveyard as his home? And what was he waiting for, wrapped in silence among the dead? By daylight, the cemetery was a place of uneasy whispers. Shopkeepers and neighbors passing by would glance at the old man from a distance, shake their heads, and mutter their conclusions. In a small town, stories travel fast, and the mystery of a man sleeping among the dead fueled every kind of speculation. Some swore he had been in prison, that he was dangerous, and that the graves were the only company he deserved. Others insisted he had gone mad after the war, that the bombs and the guns had stolen his mind and left him nothing but a shell. "A haunted man belongs in a haunted place," one woman said with a shiver. Children were warned not to go near him. Parents pulled them close whenever they passed the rusted cemetery gates. But warnings, as always, only fed curiosity. Some daring boys once slipped inside and hurled rocks toward his corner, shouting, "Hey, corpse keeper!" Their laughter rang sharp in the air, but the old man didn't flinch. He neither cursed nor chased them away. He simply sat, head bowed, as though he carried a weight too heavy to react. His silence unsettled them more than anger would have. They ran off, unnerved by the man who seemed carved from stone. Yet not everyone looked at him with fear. Once in a while, an elderly veteran walking past would pause. They didn't approach, but they would nod, slow and respectful, before continuing on. To the gossiping neighbors, this only deepened the mystery. Why would men who had served in uniform, men who knew sacrifice, show respect to someone others dismissed as a lunatic? Then came a change, unexpected and small. On a late afternoon, when the sun bled red behind the trees and shadows stretched long over the headstones, a young girl entered the cemetery. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, a thin figure with a school satchel slung across her shoulder and a notebook clutched in her arms. She didn't come to mourn. She came, as children sometimes do, to sit under the quiet trees and scribble her thoughts where no one could disturb her. It was there, on the gravel path, that she noticed him. The old man, curled against a gravestone, his coat wrapped tight, his hand gripping the worn cloth bag. She stopped, tilting her head. Her wide eyes didn't hold fear, only curiosity. She lingered longer than most, watching him breathe, watching the stillness that clung to him. Day after day, she returned, always sitting at a distance with her notebook. She sketched, she scribbled, she wrote small poems, and always, she found her gaze drifting back to the old man. Where adults saw a menace or a madman, she saw something else: sadness, loneliness, a figure not of fear, but of silence, waiting to be broken. One evening she whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "He looks like he's guarding someone, not lost, just keeping watch." Her words were swallowed by the wind, unheard by anyone but herself. Yet they marked the beginning of something. The line between the old man and the town had always been one of fear and judgment. But now, for the first time, a child's simple wonder had begun to bridge that gap. The stage was set. The world treated him as a ghost among graves. But in the eyes of one girl, he was no ghost at all. He was a story waiting to be told. The rain came suddenly one evening, a heavy curtain sweeping across the cemetery. The young girl had already left for home, her notebook tucked under her arm, her footsteps vanishing down the road. The old man remained, hunched against his familiar gravestone, the storm soaking his coat until it clung to his frail frame. He closed his eyes, too weary to move, and let the water wash over him. When he woke the next morning, the rain had passed. The ground was damp, the grass slick, and his coat smelled of mildew. He coughed, reaching for his bag, when something caught his eye. Resting against the base of the stone beside him was a folded slip of paper, edges curling from the moisture. His hand trembled as he picked it up. He hadn't seen it fall. He hadn't heard it placed. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded it. Inside, in the uneven scrawl of a child's handwriting, were words that pierced deeper than any stone thrown at him. "I don't know who you are, but if you're sad, please remember, someone wants to hear your story." The old man blinked. His lips parted, but no sound came. "I think you sleep here because you miss someone. If that's true, they would want you to be at peace." His chest tightened. He gripped the paper, his eyes stinging. "Tomorrow, I'll bring you some bread. Please don't refuse it." For a long moment he couldn't breathe. His shoulders shook, though no sound left his throat. He hadn't cried in years, not when he lost his job, not when he drifted from family who no longer understood him, not even when he chose the cemetery as his bed. But this, a child's note, left without judgment, without fear, shattered the dam of silence he had built around himself. His thumb traced the letters. He could almost see her small hand, gripping the pencil too tightly, writing with care. She had seen him not as a madman, not as a ghost, but as a person. Memories surged. He was no longer in the quiet graveyard. He was back in the desert, 40 years younger, sweat pouring down his back as shells thundered overhead. The stench of oil, the metallic taste of blood, the roar of engines filled his mind. He saw his comrades laughing one moment, gone the next, faces burned into his memory. And one face most of all, his commanding officer, the man lying now beneath the gravestone he leaned against each night. They had been surrounded. Gunfire chewed the sand. The order had come for retreat, but the commander had stayed, covering his men until the last of them escaped. The old man, then still young, had been one of those who lived. He had carried guilt with him, ever since the guilt of surviving, when his captain did not. That gravestone was no accident. It was his watchpost, his penance. He slept beside it not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he could not leave his captain alone. In his mind, the war had never ended. His duty was to stay, even if the world called him broken. But the note was a hand extended across the years, a whisper that perhaps his captain would not want him chained forever to sorrow. That night he didn't sleep. He held the paper close, reading it again and again, lips moving silently over the words. The promise that she would return tomorrow with bread stirred something long buried, anticipation. And when morning came, he waited. The sun rose, glinting off the polished stones. Hours passed, and at last, she appeared, the girl with the satchel and the notebook, walking with quick, determined steps. She stopped a few paces away, pulled something from her bag, and held it out with both hands. A small parcel, wrapped in a napkin. "I told you I'd bring it," she said softly. Her voice carried no fear, only the certainty of someone keeping a promise. For the first time in years, the old man spoke to someone who wasn't a ghost. His voice cracked like brittle wood. "Why?" She tilted her head, puzzled. "Because you look like you need a friend." He stared at her, words failing him. Then, slowly, his hand extended, fingers trembling, and he accepted the parcel. Warm bread, fresh. He could smell it through the cloth. He whispered almost to himself, "Thank you." The girl smiled, a simple, bright smile that cut through the gloom of stone and shadow. She sat down on the grass, notebook balanced on her knees. "You can tell me about whoever you're guarding here, if you want." The old man's throat tightened. He glanced at the gravestone, then back at her eager eyes. For years, he had kept his story buried in silence. But now, because of a single note, the silence had cracked. And with it came the first fragile step towards something he thought he no longer deserved: peace. The girl returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time, she carried something small: bread, an apple, even a thermos of warm tea borrowed from her mother's kitchen. The old man resisted at first, shaking his head, insisting she keep it. But she would fold her arms, stubborn, until he finally accepted. And slowly, his hands stopped trembling when he reached out to take her offerings. She asked questions, not the kind that pried, but the kind children ask with simple honesty. What was his name? Why did he sit here every night? Who rested beneath the stone he leaned against? At first he answered little, giving only short nods, or silence. But her persistence chipped away at his wall. Piece by piece, he began to tell her fragments of his story. That he had once worn a uniform, that he had once commanded respect, that he had once stood side by side with men who never came home. The girl listened with wide eyes, her pencil scratching across her notebook as she wrote down his words. Where others saw a broken vagrant, she saw a teacher. She didn't understand war. Not really, but she understood loyalty and grief, and the weight of promises kept long after the world had forgotten. Word began to spread through the town. People noticed the girl walking into the cemetery each afternoon, her satchel bulging with food, her steps purposeful. They whispered disapproval. Parents scolded her, warning of danger. "That man's not right in the head," they said. "He'll only bring you trouble." But the girl ignored them. She had looked into his eyes and seen not madness, but sorrow. And sorrow, she decided, did not make someone dangerous. One evening, as she sat beside him, a group of men gathered near the gate. They watched, muttering. Finally one called out, "Why waste your time on that ghost? He's nothing but a drunk old fool." Laughter followed. The girl stiffened, ready to shout back, but the old man placed a hand on her shoulder. His grip was gentle, but firm. "Don't," he whispered. "They don't know." And then, unexpectedly, another voice cut through the jeers. A gruff voice, steady and sharp. "You boys don't know who you're talking about." An older man stepped forward, his jacket bearing a faded veteran's patch. He walked up to the cemetery gate, his eyes fixed on the figure leaning against the gravestone. Slowly, almost reverently, he raised his hand in a salute. The crowd fell silent. "Name's Wilson," the veteran said quietly, as if speaking to himself more than to anyone else. "Sergeant Thomas Wilson. I served 2 tours, and even I heard of him. They said he carried half his platoon through fire, saved more lives than any man had a right to. If he sleeps here, it's because he's earned the right. You boys show some respect." The old man closed his eyes, pained by the recognition. He had never wanted his name spoken aloud again. Never wanted glory. Yet hearing it now, spoken with such reverence, stirred something inside him, a reminder that his life, however broken, had once mattered. The townspeople began to look at him differently. Whispers changed from scorn to wonder. Parents hushed their children, and even the mocking boys shuffled away, ashamed. The girl looked at him with pride, as if her instinct had been confirmed all along. That night, For the first time in years, Thomas Wilson did not lean on the gravestone as though seeking its strength. Instead, he sat upright, shoulders straighter, and told the girl the full story: how his commanding officer had given his life to protect his men, how guilt had chained him to this place, and how he had felt unworthy of peace ever since. The girl wrote it all down. She didn't interrupt, didn't question. When he finished, she simply closed her notebook and said, "Then I'll remember it for you." And in that promise, Thomas felt the burden shift, ever so slightly, from his shoulders to hers. For the first time, the story of his past had been given to someone who cared enough to carry it forward. The next morning dawned clear. The sky, a soft canvas of pink and gold. Birds stirred among the trees, their songs threading through the cemetery like a benediction. For the first time in years, Thomas Wilson rose before the sun fully crested the horizon. He dusted off his coat, smoothed his wiry hair as best he could, and reached into his worn bag. From it, he pulled a small bouquet of wildflowers he had gathered the night before. He walked, steady though slow, to the gravestone he had guarded all these years. With hands that no longer trembled, he laid the flowers down, arranging them carefully against the cold stone. He stood in silence, lips moving in a whisper no one else could hear. Perhaps it was a prayer, perhaps it was a farewell. The girl arrived soon after, skipping lightly down the path with her ever-present notebook. She found him not slumped in exhaustion, but standing tall beside the grave. She paused, watching quietly, sensing the change. When he turned to her, his eyes were different, no longer only heavy with sorrow, but softened with something else. Peace. He gestured for her to come closer. When she did, he placed a hand on the gravestone. "People think I slept here because I was lost," he said, voice quiet but steady. "But I was keeping watch, making sure he was never alone." He looked down at her earnest young face, her notebook clutched like a treasure. "But you reminded me. He wouldn't want me chained to this place forever. He would want me to live." The girl nodded, her eyes shining. "And I'll help people remember him, too. I'll write it down." Thomas smiled, the first true smile she had ever seen on him. Deep lines etched into his face seemed to soften, the years of grief lifting for just a moment. "Then the watch is shared," he said. They sat together in the morning light. The girl scribbled in her notebook as he spoke of his captain, of comrades who had fallen, of the lessons war had carved into him. She didn't understand every detail, but she understood enough that courage was not only found in battle, but in carrying memories, in refusing to let sacrifice be forgotten. As the town slowly came to accept him, Thomas no longer seemed a ghost among the dead. He was a living reminder of what it meant to endure, and the little girl was his witness. And so the story closed not on despair, but on a quiet renewal. An old man, once swallowed by silence, had been pulled back into life by the simplest of things, a child's note.